This afternoon, I want to talk about this year's edition of the Cotton Bowl, which is a semi-final game for the college football playoff played between the No.1 Alabama Crimson Tide and the No.4 Cincinnati Bearcats. Today I am going to preview this game, preview Cincinnati's offense versus Alabama's defense, and vice versa, previewing the players while I do that as well, and give some of my opinions during my preview, some of my basic and general opinions, and at the end, give my exact score prediction. If you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button so you can help my channel get to 3,000 subscribers, where I will be doing a giveaway. Also, comment your thoughts down below, like this video, share it around to every college football fan you know, and hit that notification bell so you can get notified when I post future prediction videos. I'm going to be discussing Michigan versus Georgia sometime tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I post that video. But let's get on to this one and discussing the Cotton Bowl. The Cotton Bowl is a very interesting matchup. In fact, it intrigues me almost as much as Georgia versus Michigan. I say almost because I'm a Michigan fan. I will always be more interested in what my team is doing. But this game is flying a little under the radar. Almost no one is giving Cincinnati a shot to win this game. Alabama is given a 71.7% chance to win, according to ESPN's Football Power Index. They are also favored by 13.5 points, according to Pick Center. Alabama is 7-6 against the spread. Cincinnati is 8-5 against the spread. And both of these teams score around 40 points, too, while only allowing around about an average of 18 points each. They're pretty close when it comes to total margin of victory. These teams are. Where the big difference is of course, the talent, the levels of players. The fact that Alabama is a name brand coached by Nick Saban, and Cincinnati is a group of five school coached by Luke Fickell, who is a coach that has been on the rise for a few years now. So, in saying that, we are going to get to my preview of the Bearcat defense versus the Crimson Tide offense. Alabama's offense is led by Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young, who is the quarterback for the Tide and has thrown for 4,322 yards, completes 68% of his passes, averages 9.4 yards per pass. He's passed for 43 touchdowns. He's only thrown an interception 4 times. He's been sacked 33 times. He has a 175.5 passer rating. Bryce Young is really good. I mean, people have compared him to Patrick Mahomes all year. And the SEC championship game, in my opinion, absolutely proved that. The no-look side lateral to, I forget if it was Brian Robinson Jr. or it was someone out of the backfield. Genius. Him running when he needed to pick up yards or to score the touchdown before halftime. Also genius. His throws are on point, and he guides his entire team. And keep in mind, this Alabama team, and I'm going to say this throughout the video, they're not your standard Alabama team. This team is not as talented, it's not as disciplined, it's not as veteran, it doesn't have, it's just not what we think of when we think of your standard Nick Saban team. Not at all. In fact, this team has nearly disappointed us all year long, and only because of their massive showing during the Georgia game does everyone all of a sudden think that they're invincible. This team is not invincible. This team lost to an 8-4 Texas A&M. But anyway, I mean, what Young has done is impressive, and The total team has passed for 4,523 yards. Of course, him making up the most of that, while the team on the ground has only rushed for 1,919 total yards. Very stark difference. The leading rusher for Alabama is Brian Robinson Jr., who has 1,071 rushing yards, averages 4.8 yards per carry, and has 14 rushing touchdowns. Roydell Williams and Trey Sanders are some of the names that you'll hear out of the backfield as they'll occasionally be rotated in for Brian Robinson. Alabama has also allowed a total of 35 sacks all year. This Alabama O-line has been very weak at times, to be fair. I mean, Brian Robinson Jr., again, just like the rest of this team, is not your normal Alabama standard. This team has frustrated Nick Saban all year, I would say, except for that performance against Georgia when everything clicked together. Alabama being this high ceiling but low floor kind of team when it comes to their efficiency and performance with their talent. Jamison Williams and John Mechie III are their two main guys at the wide receiver position. Mechie for Alabama is unfortunately out, so we're not going to be talking about his stats. He's out with a torn ACL, and that stinks if you're an Alabama fan because he was your leader in receptions with 96 and second in total receiving yards with over 1,000. Jamison Williams is the deep threat. He has 1,445 receiving yards, 21.3 yards per reception on average, and 15 receiving touchdowns. Expect Slade Bolden, who has 333 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, to step up, along with Trayshawn Holden, another wide receiver, Cameron Latu, a tight end, and possibly even expect Brian Robinson Jr. to get a greater share of receiving yards. Him, Latu, Holden, and Billingsley as well, another tight end, all have over 200 receiving yards, and each of them at least have 1 receiving touchdown. Alabama, listen, offense is great. You know, they score an average of 42.2 points per game, force an average of 500 yards on their opponents. About 350 of them are passing, 150 are rushing, just about. But this team is a team that struggled against a 6-6 LSU, lost to an 8-4 A&M. You saw what happened to them when they faced a solid defense without one of their playmakers against Auburn, only scoring 10 points a game against that Auburn team is nothing to be proud of. And then it all came together against Georgia. And Georgia is a good team who was exposed on that night. This Alabama team, just combining their performances and what they've done during their matchups and everything, and just how they operate, the fact that they are much more pass-oriented than they are run-oriented. They remind me a lot of Ohio State as a Michigan fan. Explosive offense, and you don't always know what kind of explosive offense you'll get, because sometimes the mistakes, they come out and explode, and then sometimes everything comes together, like Ohio State against Michigan State, or even Ohio State against some of those lower level teams, and they just, they push right through. So that's what Alabama reminds me of. This offense is not to be taken lightly. Do not take it lightly. I feel like that's what Georgia did, and that's ultimately why Georgia, lost this game. The Bearcat defense is 4th, however, in scoring defense, only allowing 16.1 points per game. They allow on average around 300 yards per game. 170 of those are passing. 140 of those are rushing. This team has played an American schedule from the American Conference, so they have not faced the greatest amount of competition. But what I do want to say, in some of their bigger games, this is how the Bearcat defense has performed, allowing 13 points against Notre Dame, allowing 14 against SMU and allowing 20 against Houston, all of whom have pretty decent scoring offenses. One of whom, Notre Dame, who's 11-1, is a Power 5 team. So Cincinnati here do not take their defense lightly either. Their leader on defense is Ahmad Gardner, also known as Sauce Gardner. He has 35 total tackles, 3 sacks, 4 passes defended, 3 picks, and a forced fumble. This defense is coached by the one and only Mike Tressel, who I thought was an amazing hire to replace Marcus Freeman, and he's absolutely shown that. This defense just sits in the top 10, and I think about almost every category outside of maybe rushing defense. So this is a great team. They're exceptionally well at defending the pass. Their leader in interceptions is Deshaun Pace, a linebacker with 4 interceptions. He also has 2 passes defended, 86 total tackles, a half sack, and a fumble recovery. Kobe Bryant and Arquan Bush, cornerbacks, each have 3 picks as well. Kobe Bryant has 11 passes defended and a pick 6 and 2 forced fumbles. He has 40 total tackles. Bush has 36. So those are just some leaders in the secondary. Listen, their corners are very good. They're highly ranked. I think Bryant and Gardner are some of the best ranked in the nation. You have to take them seriously. You can't make turnovers against this team either, because this team, we'll get to the offense later, outside of special teams, this team just capitalizes on what they can. Curtis Brooks, one of their defensive linemen, leads the team in sacks with 7.5. He has a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. He has 50 total tackles. Joel DeBlanco, a linebacker, has 5.5 total sacks, a pick, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Finally, Malik Van, another defensive lineman, has 32 total tackles, 3.5 sacks, 3 passes defended, and a forced fumble. Those are just some leaders that I'm mentioning, and your leader in total tackles is Joel DeBlanco, who I just mentioned. I mean, this defense, again, is impressive, and keep in mind, they're doing all this, yes, against worse competition. They're doing this with worse talent as well, and a theme about Cincinnati that we all have to remember, they step up in those big games. They just do. They play down to their competition, and then when they play a bigger, badder, better team, like SMU, like Houston, like Notre Dame, they crush it. They absolutely crush it. You could even mention UCF, who's better than Navy, Tulane, and Tulsa, all teams that Cincinnati did struggle against. So that is the Crimson Tide offense against the Bearcat defense. And now we are going to move on to previewing the Bearcat offense versus the Crimson Tide defense. The Bearcat offense here is, again, you can't really take it lightly. It shows up in big games, hanging 48 on SMU, hanging 24 on Notre Dame, and that game they still made plenty of mistakes and did well on offense and defense, all things considered, getting an 11-point win. But they're led by Desmond Ridder, who has 3,190 passing yards, completes 65.9% of his passes, averages 9 yards per pass. He has 30 touchdowns, 8 picks. He's been sacked 19 times, and he has a 164.8 passer rating. Ridder is an underappreciated guy. Now, he's not the greatest QB. He's not an elite QB. I would say that he is a good QB. He is not a Bryce Young. This offense in whole, I would actually proclaim, is not an Alabama offense. Yes, they score 39.2 points per game, but they only produce around 428 yards. 248 of those are passing, 179 of those are rushing. This team has a more balanced outcome and does favor the run more than Alabama does. They're led on the ground by Jerome Ford, the running back, with 1,242 rushing yards, 6.2 yards per carry, and 19 rushing touchdowns. Desmond Ridder is second in rushing yards with 361, 3.6 yards per carry, and 6 rushing touchdowns. He has a long of 40. Jerome Ford has a long of 79. And to go back, that compares pretty well with Brian Robinson's long of 63. And then on the receiving end, you have Alec Pierce, the wide receiver, who has 867 receiving yards, 17.3 yards per reception, and 8 receiving touchdowns. Again, this offense is not nearly as explosive as Alabama's. You don't even have a single 1,000-yard receiver. You have a 1,000-yard rusher, though. Your QB is more prone to running than, say, Bryce Young is. You've only allowed 19 sacks, too, and that's not saying that, Cincinnati's O-line is going to push around Alabama's D-line, because we're going to get to Will Anderson here in a few minutes and how he should have been a Heisman finalist, whatever. But this offense is more slow. It's not so much up-tempo, in-your-face, spread as much as Alabama's is, and that's a fact. Tyler Scott and Trey Tucker are wide receivers to watch out for as well, along with Josh Wiley, the tight end, who has 320 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. That right there is the Bearcat offense, and this unit did pretty well last year. I think this is Ridder's best year by passer rating. He's also had by far his most passing touchdowns in a season, and he's done well all year. He's won this team 13 games. He hasn't lost this team any games as they're undefeated. So Alabama should not take this offense lightly, especially with some of Alabama's defensive struggles. Alabama, you're allowing 20.2 points per game. I think it's worse than last year's defense by a pretty good margin. And last year, you couldn't necessarily tackle people in practice. There were very limited practices. This defense is not a good defense by Alabama standards. Whenever it comes to penalties, to blown assignments, we saw some of this in the Texas A&M loss and in plenty of other games as well. Oftentimes, in an Alabama game, only one part of the machine, whether it's the offense or the defense, is working. And most of the time, the part that's working is the offense. This team does only allow 300 yards, though, on average. 223 of them are passing. 82.8 of them are rushing. This team stepped up when it came to the run defense against Georgia. And throughout the whole year, they have had a better rush defense than they have a passing defense. And this is especially the case with their star, Will Anderson, who has 15 and a half sacks, 91 total tackles, 2 passes defended. It's crazy. He leads the nation in sacks. And the guy is not even draft eligible, I don't think. He's just a sophomore from Hampton, Georgia, and his fellow linebacker, Henry To'o, I think that's how you pronounce it, is the leader in total tackles with 100, 4 total sacks, a pass defended, and a forced fumble. Your leader in interceptions is DeMarco Helms, a defensive back, with 3. Jalen Armour Davis and Jordan Battle, all of those guys combined have 3 interceptions each. Battle has 2 pick sixes. Helms and Battle have 3 passes defended. Armour Davis has 4. And Battle and Helms also share another stat with 74 total tackles each, Davis with 30. Some of your leaders in the sack department, we've already discussed Will Anderson with that amazing 15 and a half sacks. Fidarian Mathis, a defensive lineman, has 8 total sacks, a forced fumble, and 2 fumble recoveries. Dallas Turner has 5.5 sacks. To'o has 4. Byron Young, a defensive lineman, and Christian Harris, a linebacker, each have 2. This Alabama defense has 46 sacks. It's a lot. That's one, I think, top 10 in the nation. They only have 5 fumble recoveries, 15 interceptions, which again, if you go back to Cincy's defense, they have 18 interceptions, 15 fumble recoveries. I would say that Cincy's defense and Alabama's offense are their strong points. What we're previewing right now is kind of their weaker points to a certain degree, is what I will say. I do expect a great matchup, is all I will say here. I think that these teams are more evenly matched and that their strengths match up with each other well more than some other teams think. I mean, there are a lot of people out there thinking that, this Alabama defense will shut down Cincy and that the Alabama offense will roll over Cincy's defense. I don't think that's going to happen. And we're going to get to my prediction just now, and I'm going to reveal 31 Alabama, 21 Cincinnati is what I am thinking. And the reasoning for that is, one, Cincy plays up to their competition. We've seen this in the SMU game. You've seen it against Notre Dame. You've seen it against UCF, against Houston. I mean, they blow out. They dominate teams who are good. And then they kind of go in hibernation mode or coast or autopilot, whatever you want to call it, against these smaller teams like, let's say, Navy, Tulane, Tulsa, UCF. That's just what they do. And let me tell you something. If Oklahoma State, won their game and didn't lose, and the debate would have been Cincinnati versus Oklahoma State, I would have lobbied that Cincinnati was the better team. They haven't lost a game. They played at IU, who early in the year, before their injuries, was a much better team than they are now. Notre Dame's 11-1, and they beat them. Oklahoma State had not beaten an opponent close to the record Notre Dame had with 11 wins. And yeah, I mean, that's honestly, this team deserves to be in the playoff. Reason number 2 is Alabama, with the exception of Georgia. Look at what Alabama has done against good teams. Just look. An example, Ole Miss, they dominated. Georgia, they dominated. Arkansas, solid team, they struggled. Auburn, they're 6-6, but they're a solid team. They deeply struggled. LSU, not such a good team, they struggled. Tennessee, good team. The score looks deceiving. If you watched that game, you knew that Nick Saban hated the way his team performed. They struggled. A&M, a good team, they lost. And they almost lost on the road to a Florida team who was in disarray. I mean, the cracks were visible the entire year. This team has shown up against Georgia. They showed up against Ole Miss. Most of the games in between, outside of Mississippi State, they failed. They catastrophically failed their assignments, losing to A&M, who's a Saban assistant, and then performing poorly against teams like Arkansas, LSU, and Tennessee and Auburn, at least for Alabama standards. That's reason 2. We've discussed reason 1. And another thing, too, is the playoff games. This is number 3. They're rarely blowouts. And when they are, it's Oklahoma, and we know how Oklahoma is on defense. Your defensive underrated teams, look at Washington in 2016, for example. They played Alabama close. They play teams tight. And Cincinnati's this defensive-focused team. They're coached by Mike Tressel on defense, the guy that held Ohio State to under 20 offensive points when he was at MSU in 2018. I mean, Mike Tressel is a phenomenal defensive coordinator. I'm saying this as a Michigan fan, a guy who hated his guts because he coached an arch rival of my school, the Michigan Wolverines. He's a great DC. Cincinnati's going to come prepared. They'll probably take some kind of early lead or score first off of maybe trickeration. I fully expect Cincinnati to throw everything they have first before Alabama does, because I think Cincy will take that approach knowing that they are the inferior team. And I think in the end that Alabama, being the superior team on depth and head coaching and likely assistant coaching as well, will get them through, but it will be a hard fought game. And there will probably be a moment where Alabama fans are panicking just a little bit. That's my prediction. Again, I have Alabama winning. I don't see any reason why to give Cincinnati the win unless you're straight up picking the upset. There's a reason for it to be close, but in the end, Alabama, with how they did against Georgia and their far superior talent and their good coaching, I mean, if Cincinnati wins this game, then we've been treating Cincinnati wrong all year. That's it for the video. If you liked this video, remember to hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. My Georgia versus Michigan preview plus prediction will be coming out tomorrow, and it will look just a little different because it's my team. I want to put a little more effort into it, change some stuff up, and test some things that my subscribers and myself have been thinking about. So stay tuned for that. Like this video, comment your thoughts down below. Again, help me get to 3,000 subscribers so I can do my giveaway. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys around.